Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to a returning guest, Robert Gwaltney Jr., about Sing Down the Moon. Robert, with his debut novel, The Cicada Tree, won the Georgia Author of the Year for first novel, and he won the Somerset Award for literary fiction. You've written for Blue Mountain Review, and did you edit there as well, Robert?
I did, very briefly, for about a year.
Okay, lovely, lovely. Well, welcome back. And will you give the audience an overview of what Sing Down the Moon is about?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dan, for having me back. It's a pleasure to spend time with you.
Same here. Same here.
So, Sing Down the Moon is told from the perspective of 16-year-old Leontyne Skye, who's bound by blood and legacy to Damascus, which is an ancient fig tree that grows on the Georgia coastal barrier island of Good Hope, a tree that feeds the dead and poisons the living. As Leontyne's mother Eulalie disintegrates before her very eyes, Leontyne must confront a birthright that will take everything from her as it has her mother: teeth, hair, and bone. Leontyne's already lost parts of herself, a hand, and her memory in a happening 2 years prior known as Tribulation Day. And when a very handsome and mysterious stranger arrives on Good Hope, Leontyne's memories slowly resurface, and with these memories, the discovery of a chilling truth. If she rejects her legacy, she'll shatter the fragile balance between the living and the dead, forcing her to choose. She can save the island and those she loves, or she can save herself.
Well, you don't give us much of a challenge there, do you?
No.
So let's start a little bit with craft before we dive into the characters and stuff. So what came to you first about this book? Was it Leontyne, or was it the Damascus tree, or what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, yes. Well, I can answer that two ways. I would say initially, this story was born from fear. I was writing The Cicada Tree, and about 70% through of writing that book, I just had this sudden fear that maybe I only had one book in me to write. I told the only story I know to tell. I'd already used all the words that I knew. So yeah, I write from a place of obsession. So I don't let myself have other ideas seep in. But I did, in that moment of fear, allow myself to think about what I might do next. And I began to think a little bit about the story. And then once I knew I had a home to go to after The Cicada Tree, then I could sort of relax and finish writing that book. But I would say the story comes to me first with character, then place, and then plot. Once I have a sense of character, I know, and a sense of where that character comes from, I have a better sense of what they want and perhaps what their character arc might be. Now, with this particular book, I didn't know from the get-go in Sing Down the Moon who was going to tell this story. I read it from several different perspectives. It wasn't until later that I really landed on Leontyne Skye to tell the story. She initially was this really sort of a secondary character that I didn't think much of. And then I had this sort of vision of her. And I connected with her in that moment. And I knew this is Leontyne's story. This is who needs to narrate this book.
Well, I don't know whom else you had chosen as a potential narrator, but I tell you, Leontyne's story is excellent, and it's fun to watch it unfold because it does unfold. I think when you talk about losing a memory and then beginning to gain some of it back, that certainly lends itself to unfolding a story. So we, along with Leontyne, get to experience what she's already experienced. She just doesn't remember.
Correct. Yes. The book starts off with, one of the first things that I heard when we were talking about how this story came to me is this voice. And they said this one thing. They said, "We are all dead here on Good Hope." And I didn't know who said it. I didn't know why they said it. That actually is the very first line in the book. So Leontyne, when we're talking about memory, she's hearing this. She doesn't know who said it, why they said it. And really throughout this book, she's a girl just trying to figure out who she was before, and she's having to rely upon just a handful of folks on this island to tell her who she was before and who she's going to be.
Well, and with Eulalie, because she is towards the end of her life, and she is losing things like her memory and her teeth and her body parts, it is one of those things that, you would think as the mother, she would inform Leontyne who she was, where she was, and this stuff, but yet she's not capable of doing that. She's barely capable of keeping herself upright and alive.
Correct. Yes, she cannot rely on her mother. And, as I stated early on when providing an overview of this book, Leontine and her mother come from a long line of women whose last name is Skye. And their legacy really is to tend this ancient fig tree named Damascus. Tending this tree, Damascus, has degenerative properties. Those who tend this confluence of life and death within this ancient fig tree ultimately begin to disintegrate themselves. So Leontine, more than anything, doesn't want to be like her mother. She wants to leave Good Hope, and she wants to be able to escape her legacy of tending that tree. And of course, her mother is going to do all that she can do to keep her there with her.
Yeah, and I think, when you mentioned fear earlier in writing the cicada tree, and you wondered if that was the only book you had in you, I think Leontine has a lot of fear as to what her future will hold. And understandably so, when you come from a lineage of women who tend a tree and the tree ends up killing them, for lack of a better way to put it. I mean, it steals their life.
It
But
does.
but they have a responsibility to tend the tree to keep everybody else, in a civil society, so to speak.
Right, exactly. To keep, it's a fragile balance
Yes.
that these women are tending, and without it, that thin veil between the living and dead um, begins to disintegrate.
And it is sort of in that way, the thin line between the living and the dead. It reminds me of almost being a minister in some ways. There's that afterlife that ministers portend that exists, and there are lots of us who believe there might be an afterlife. I don't know where I'm going, of that I'm sure, but it is one of those things that there's a huge responsibility with that, and I don't think everyone is cut out for those types of responsibilities.
No, you're right. I mean, in many regards, I suppose. Well, so it's interesting. Eulalie is known as the Great Redeemer, and she is known as the Great Redeemer because one of the cottage industry that keeps Good Hope afloat and really keeps Eulalie and her daughter there on the island is making this highly addictive drug called redemption, and it's from the sarah figs that grow on this fig tree that capture haints or ghosts that make their way across the river. So they're able to make this highly addictive drug that's highly sought after. Those individuals who are addicted to redemption are known as sinners. So it is it's a thing that the Skye women have always done to earn their keep, their own Good Hope.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, I don't know, maybe it's just me and my ethereal thinking, but I think there's a lot that can be derived from this in comparison to, say, politics. We elect people to hopefully lead us and guide us and protect us. That doesn't always happen. So, here's this Damascus who, gives life to some and takes it from others. So it's I don't know. Did you have any political leanings in writing this? Was there any hidden things that I should have noticed that I didn't, or
Well, I think there are lots of. I think that the thing about this book is I'd hope to set out to tell a story on the surface that would be entertaining, but I think that for those who care for this sort of thing, there are layers beneath that story. Um, so I think that you can't take politics out of much of anything, really,
not
politics
not
or
really?
religion. I think that there's always some element of that in every story that's told. I don't know that I consciously, well, I don't set out to be didactic when I tell a story. I don't set out to really give a lesson, but and oftentimes, the subconscious is at work. There are things that I'm led toward that I really don't fully understand why I did until I'm on the other side of having written the book.
So may I assume that you're sort of a quasi organic writer? Do you?
Very much so.
I mean, I
Very much
assume
so.
so since our conversation today. So
Yeah, I have, I have a sense of story. I live in the story in my head for a long time. I don't profusely outline. I do take notes when I'm building the world, having a sense of who these people are and a sense of place. And I have a sense of the beginning, the middle, and the end, which are guideposts for me. I knew very early on what the first sentence of the book was going to be. And a couple of chapters in, I knew what the very last sentence of the book was going to be. But I didn't know um, the journey that Leontyne, the protagonist, would take to be able to get there. So part of the creative process for me is just the enjoyment of not knowing everything that's going to happen. If I knew the story already, I don't know that I would want to write it. I would very much love the organic approach, listening, and I know it sounds woo woo, but
yeah.
listening to what those characters um, tell me that they want and where they need to go. And I still have those guideposts so I don't let them veer me off course.
Well, I agree. I am much more of an organic writer. I do take notes as well, and I mostly think I know where the story is going, but I'm along for the ride, and my characters all talk to me. I mean, sometimes they wake me up in the middle of the night. I'm not done. And I'm like, oh, I thought you were finished with me. All right, I see how this is, you know. And of course, I think harnessing that and the more authors I talk to, the more I realize we're not alone, Robert. A lot of people, their characters talk to them. Now, some I have interviewed some people who are like, hell no, my characters never talk to me. I don't listen to them. And I think to myself, that's because typically they're outliners, heavy outliners. But then some outliners, their characters talk to them as well. So I'm like, and it's a conversation. All authors want to have a conversation with the reader. And if your characters don't talk to you, how are they going to talk to the reader? Is sort of my estimation. Not that
Yeah,
I'm an expert.
no, I agree. I think that I'm always in conversation with my characters. I'm talking to them. They're talking to me. I'm always sorting through. Yeah, always in dialogue. When yeah, I love like a lot of writers. I have a day job, so I love that half hour of commute time from home to the office because I'm able to live in that story for a little while before I get to work, and then on the way home in the afternoons as well.
So another Georgia author of the year, Wanda Morris, has haints in her book, and it's funny because in Eastern North Carolina, the term was some people use the term haint, but I didn't really understand what it was until I read Wanda's book and now yours. You know that it's a little more than just an ugly old woman. You know, it typically is a witch, and I like that. I like the fact that along the barrier coast of Georgia and in Eastern North Carolina, people believe in magical realism. It is not something to be ashamed of. There are people who actively believe in it and believe that magic happens every day of their lives. Were you, when you were growing up, was that something that intrigued you?
Yeah, I think that in general, I lived inside my head. I was always telling myself stories to sort of survive the tough times of being a peculiar boy in a rural Southwest Georgia town. But absolutely, I think that elements of magic for me are really indicative of hope. I think that it's a hopeful thing to
Mhm.
be able, possibility, I suppose. And even now, I like to think that there are unexplainable things that happen. I like to think that there's magic around the corner, perhaps.
I agree with you. And I think that makes our lives more fun. I'm not comparing mine to anyone else, but I can say for myself, it makes my life fun to assume that if I need to find something, I'm going to find it. Things don't stay lost forever, and including memory, because there are some things that I remember easily, and some things I have to sort of dig a little bit to figure them out. So that is So, without foreshadowing, because I'm certainly not trying to say I hope you lose your mind at the end of your life, but
Thank
so
you.
well, I mean, you've got a sharp mind. I don't think you will, but so is losing one's mind something that was on your mind when you were writing this, or was that just a byproduct of the story, or is that a fear you have? I mean, some people live in fear of that.
Well, I don't think that I set out to write Leontyne's memory loss, out of fear. But I do think that if I'm looking ahead in the future, I think that a fate that I would, certainly not want to endure would be losing myself and losing memory. I think that would be a pretty awful thing because it begs the question: who are we without our memories, really?
I
Uh,
agree with you. So I love the twins, and I love the fact that they're so very different from each other. Um, do you have a fascination with twins? I do in real life,
a
but
bit, yeah. I've always been fascinated with stories about twins. My father is a twin.
oh, okay.
My third brother has two sets of twins, boys, two sets of twins within a year of each
Oh
other.
my good heavens, and a very tired wife.
Yes, exactly. It's chaos in their home. They're
I can imagine.
fourth grade, fifth grade.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I think that there's something so unique about them. They can be so identical and so opposite at the same time. And it's funny how because I remember when I was in elementary school, I went to school with a set of twins that I went to high school with them later. I changed schools a lot growing up. And I remember in the second grade, I liked one of them much more than the other one. In high school, I didn't like the one I liked in the second grade. I only liked his brother. Because, there again, they had grown up differently.
right. Yeah, it's I actually when I during that period of fear when I was writing Cicada Tree and I turned myself loose to think about other stories. The twins actually were the first two named characters that came to mind. I had this sense of twins, Rebecca and Avery Longwood, who were quite very different, as you stated earlier. But yeah, from a character perspective, those two individuals, older versions of them that actually made their way into the final version of the book, but the twins and this relationship between the two of them um, uh, became more fully formed early on.
I like them, and it's and I only mentioned the twins that I knew in the second grade in high school because I feel like Leontine sort of has blinders on for part of her story as to which twin she trusts. And I think that obviously towards the end, we realize that maybe what she had thought was one way is indeed something entirely different. And I will say that reveal of how she is only a one-handed child was very difficult, but very satisfying.
Good. Good. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. Yes, she has to rely on people around her, specifically, Rebecca and Avery Longwood, to help guide her through who she was before and what happened. And at times, are they reliable or are they not?
Yeah. Well, which I think is always the case when someone else has to remember for you, which I think that, is a real truism in life. It's like not everybody experiences the same experiences the same way. Everybody's got
Absolutely.
something different.
You could have two people in the same room watching the same thing occur, and they're going to have two very different accounts.
Yes, absolutely. So you give us a couple of what I would call sexy men characters.
Mm.
Um, and did you enjoy writing those?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I
Yeah,
do. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't, but
it
anyway.
was it was not a painful experience.
I can't imagine
Well,
it was.
well, and one can live sort of vicariously through your characters as well. But yeah, there are two characters. One is really a bit of a ghost. You only know him through memory. You never see him on the page. You never hear him speak on the page. And then there's a mysterious stranger who makes his way onto the island, who really disrupts their lives and really does cause a little bit of a ruckus between especially between Rebecca and Avery Longwood. And this mysterious stranger presents great challenges for Leontyne, because Leontyne herself has a bit of a crush on Rebecca Longwood. And she longs to escape Good Hope one day, and she longs to escape Good Hope with Rebecca Longwood, whose nickname is the Blue Heron.
Which I loved those nicknames. And his is Fiddler Crab, right? Avery's.
Avery, yes, they're two very different. Blue Heron, Rebecca, Leontyne will say things like, Rebecca, sleek and tall, I love you best of all. And Fiddler Crab, Avery is the nervous sort, not anything like his sister. So, Leontyne calls him Fiddler Crab because he is such a nervous thing.
So that's interesting to me, because I think that, as an author, to give characters nicknames can be difficult, but I thought you did that so well, because you really feel it's not a huge cast of characters, it's a smaller cast of characters. So
Right.
you feel like you know them intimately.
Yeah, I think, probably it takes probably some readers a minute to sort of sort through who's who and what's what. But yeah, I think eventually it becomes easy for the reader, because you're right, it's not a large cast of characters on this very isolated Georgia barrier island.
Do you think any of them will make a return at any point in the future?
Yeah, I will never say never about anything. Right now, I would say had that question asked of me a lot with the Cicada Tree, the first book, and I really
Right.
don't have any inclination to bring them back, and I don't really have the sense of doing that with Sing Down the Moon either. But I will never say never, because I'll find myself having to eat those words.
That is very true. That's very true. Well, Robert, once again, Sing Down the Moon is so good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan, for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.